Can you believe some executives are getting paid $1 trillion while the rest of us are just trying to keep the lights on? It's a reality that hits harder than a concrete wall, especially when your boss acts like they're already worth a king's ransom but treats their team like pocket change. This is the story of Victor Thorne, the man who believed he walked on water while everyone else was drowning in the deep end, and how his insatiable quest for a bonus as big as a small country's GDP led him to make the gravest error of his career. You see, he might have landed an astronomical sum for himself, but that kind of greed always comes at a cost, and my firing, that cold, unjust act, was his biggest mistake. It all started in the bustling glass and steel offices of Prodigy Innovations, a place that promised so much, but delivered a very different kind of future. I remember my first day, late January 2023. The air still crisp with the promise of a new year. Prodigy Innovations, a company lauded for its disruptive tech and bold vision, felt like stepping into the future. I'd been a project lead for years, but this was a step up, a chance to really make my mark. My cubicle, nestled on the 17th floor, offered a sliver of the city skyline, a view that once filled me with a quiet ambition. My new boss, Victor Thorne, was rumored to be a force of nature, a man with a mind like a steel trap and an ambition that could move mountains. People whispered about his legendary work ethic, his ability to spot trends, and how he was pivotal in securing massive contracts. He was a corporate titan in the making, or so I was told. Little did I know, this titan had feet of clay and a heart carved from granite. The first few weeks were a blur of new systems, new faces, and the relentless hum of activity. Thorne was a whirlwind, often seen striding through the open-plan office, his sharp suits impeccable, his phone permanently affixed to his ear. He had a way of looking through people, not at them, as if we were all just pixels on a spreadsheet. My initial impression was that he was just incredibly focused, maybe a little intimidating, but surely that came with the territory of leadership at this level, right? I tried to catch his eye a few times to introduce myself properly beyond the brief HR handoff, but he'd nod dismissively, his gaze already moving to the next flickering thought in his hyperactive brain. "We're a fast-paced environment here. No time for hand-holding," he'd once barked into his phone, loud enough for half the floor to hear, and I just shrugged, thinking, fair enough, I'm here to work. But then the cracks started to show, tiny at first, like hairline fractures in a pristine vase. The first time I felt that icy dread creep up my spine was during a team meeting in early March. We were reviewing the Q1 project milestones. Sarah, a senior analyst who'd been with Prodigy for nearly a decade, presented her team's progress. She was thorough, detailing every step, every metric. Thorne sat at the head of the polished oak table, fiddling with a pen, his eyes scanning his tablet rather than Sarah's meticulously crafted presentation. When she finished, an expectant silence hung in the air. We waited for his feedback, his strategic input. Instead, he slammed his tablet onto the table with a sharp thwack. "Sarah, this is kindergarten stuff," he sneered, his voice cutting through the quiet. "Where's the disruption? Where's the trillion-dollar thinking? This is just maintenance. We don't do maintenance at Prodigy. We innovate. You're wasting my time." Sarah's face, usually so composed, crumbled. Her cheeks flushed a deep crimson, and she bit her lip, clutching her notes like a shield. My stomach did a flip. That was brutal, unnecessary. It wasn't about the content. It was about the humiliation. That day, the sparkle of Prodigy Innovations dulled a little in my eyes. The man wasn't just driven, he was a bulldozer, crushing anything that stood in his way, including the people who built the very roads he drove on. But that, as it turned out, was just the prelude to the symphony of torment Victor Thorne was about to conduct. The real problem, the one that truly cemented Victor Thorne's status as the worst boss ever, wasn't just his brutal honesty or his relentless ambition. It was his total, utter disconnect from the humans under his charge. He didn't see people. He saw resources, numbers, levers to pull in his personal quest for the next big win, the next massive bonus. The news about executives landing astronomical compensation packages, even while their companies fluctuated and their employees toiled, felt like a blueprint for Thorne's worldview. He was constantly chasing that mythical brass ring, that trillion-dollar valuation, and he didn't care who he had to grind into dust to get there. One of his first major initiatives, dubbed the Synergy Optimization Protocol, rolled out in late March. It sounded fancy, like something out of a tech bro manifesto, but what it really meant was more work, fewer resources, and absolute micromanagement. Thorne installed new software on every computer that tracked active work time, keystrokes, and even mouse movements. He made it clear during a mandatory all-hands meeting, his voice devoid of warmth, "We're eliminating all dead time. Every minute you're here is a minute you're generating value. If you're not actively contributing, you're actively detracting." My heart sank. The unspoken truth was that active contribution meant no breaks, no water cooler chats, no moments to even just think without the fear of a red flag popping up on Thorne's personal dashboard. The office, once a place of collaborative energy, became a silent mausoleum of clicking keyboards and hushed whispers. People started eating lunch at their desks, hunched over their screens, because taking a 30-minute break felt like a rebellion. I saw Sarah sneak to the restroom with her phone, whispering to her elderly mother, only to jump when Thorne's voice boomed from his office. "Is that a personal call, Sarah? On company time?" The humiliation burned, even for me watching from afar. We were no longer employees. We were cogs, constantly monitored, expected to spin at maximum velocity or face the chopping block. My own internal monologue started to sound like Thorne's, constantly questioning if I was productive enough, fast enough, valuable enough. The city skyline outside my window, once a source of inspiration, now felt like a prison wall. Then came the Rapid Prototype Initiative in May. This was my big chance. I was leading a small, dedicated team on a cutting-edge project, something I'd poured my heart and soul into. We'd worked late nights, brainstormed furiously, and were genuinely excited about our solution. The initial data was promising, truly groundbreaking. Thorne had even, dare I say, seemed impressed during our initial check-ins. We were scheduled to present our final prototype to the executive board on a Tuesday morning. I stayed up all Sunday night, polishing the slides, anticipating every question. But on Monday afternoon, Thorne called me into his office, a smirk playing on his lips. "Good work, Mark," he said, leaning back in his expensive leather chair. "Impressive numbers. I'll be taking the lead on the presentation tomorrow. You and your team can provide support from the back of the room." My jaw practically hit the floor. "But, sir, we've developed this from the ground up," I stammered. "I've been preparing for weeks." He cut me off with a dismissive wave. "Details, details. I'm the one with the vision, the one who can articulate the trillion-dollar potential to the board. You just focus on the technicals. Don't worry, your work won't go unnoticed." Except it did. During the presentation, he spoke for 90% of the time, taking full credit for every innovative feature, every successful metric. He even pointed to a slide I'd designed, saying, "This, gentleman, is my team's ingenuity under my guidance." My stomach churned with a mixture of anger and disbelief. It was a gut punch, a complete erasure of my team's hard work, our late nights, our passion. That day, I felt like a ghost in my own project, invisible and insignificant. My personal pride, my sense of professional accomplishment, was utterly crushed. It was then I realized that Thorne wasn't just a micromanager. He was a vampire, sucking the lifeblood out of his team to fuel his own soaring ambitions. The true horror of Thorne's regime escalated dramatically in July with the sudden, brutal firing of my coworker, David. David wasn't just a colleague. He was the glue that held our department together. Always ready with a dry joke, a helpful tip, or a calming presence, he was a steady hand in the storm that Thorne constantly whipped up. David was a quiet, unassuming family man, diligently supporting his 2 kids and ailing mother. His only crime? He had politely pushed back against Thorne's new cost-cutting mandate that required us to submit a detailed justification for every single office supply request, down to individual pens. David had, quite reasonably, suggested it was creating more administrative overhead than it saved, especially for a department handling millions in project budgets. Thorne had called him into his office on a Friday afternoon, a predatory glint in his eye. Later that day, David emerged, his face ashen, clutching a small cardboard box with his personal effects. His voice was barely a whisper when he told us. He said I wasn't a cultural fit, said I lacked forward-thinking proactivity. It was a gut-wrenching moment. He wasn't allowed to say goodbye properly. A security guard escorted him out. We all stood there, numb, watching David, a good man, walk out of the office he'd dedicated years to, all because he dared to question the all-powerful Thorne. His firing sent a chilling message through the office: conformity or bust. My fear, which had been a low hum, now throbbed like a drum in my chest. If David, a tenured, well-liked, and rational voice, could be so easily discarded, what hope was there for any of us?
"Excuse me, Victor?" I said, my voice surprisingly clear and firm. The use of his first name, not Sir or Mr. Thorne, made the air crackle. Everyone froze. Thorne stopped talking, his eyes narrowing to slits. "Do you mind, Mark? I'm having an important discussion about the future of this company." His tone was laced with menace, a low growl meant to put me back in my place. "Yes, I do mind," I countered, the words feeling like molten lead, but also exhilaratingly free. "Because that future, your future, is being built on a foundation of lies and a pile of broken people." A gasp rippled through the onlookers. The sycophants instantly melted away, leaving Thorne exposed. His face went from irritated to thunderous. His cheeks flushed a deep, angry red, and a vein pulsed in his temple. "What exactly are you implying, Mark?" he hissed, his voice dangerously low, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "Are you accusing me of something?" "I'm stating facts," I replied, the fear still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but now overshadowed by a powerful, burning conviction. "I'm talking about Project Chimera's adjusted figures that Ben was forced to falsify. I'm talking about David, who you fired for daring to speak up, and Emily, who you threatened for prioritizing her health and her unborn child over your impossible demands." The entire office was silent, a palpable tension hanging heavy in the air. People were openly staring now, some with wide, disbelieving eyes, others with expressions of grim, knowing solidarity. Thorne took a step towards me, his jaw clenched, his hands balled into fists. He looked like a cornered animal, enraged and dangerous. "You have lost your mind, Mark," he snarled, his voice rising. "You are making baseless accusations. This is insubordination of the highest order." He pointed a shaking finger at me. "You're done. Clean out your desk, now. You're fired. Effective immediately." A wave of relief, strangely, washed over me, even as the words "you're fired" hung in the air. It was a release, a liberation from the cage I'd been trapped in. But I wasn't done. "You can fire me, Victor," I said, my voice unwavering, "but you can't erase the truth. You chased your trillion-dollar dream by crushing the people who actually build things. You rewarded yourself lavishly while demanding we sacrifice everything, even our ethics, our health, our families. You think you're a visionary, but you're just a bully who got lucky, and your luck just ran out." Before Thorne could respond, before he could call security, Ben, the timid data analyst, stepped forward, his face pale but determined. "He's right, Mr. Thorne," Ben said, his voice trembling but clear. "I did adjust the Project Chimera data, under duress." Then Sarah, the senior analyst Thorne had publicly humiliated months ago, also spoke up, her voice surprisingly strong. "And I witnessed David's unfair dismissal and heard your threats to Emily. This isn't just one person's opinion, Victor. This is a pattern." Other whispers started, a low murmur that grew into a crescendo of agreement. Thorne stood there, his face contorted in a mixture of disbelief and fury, his carefully constructed facade crumbling before his eyes. The power had shifted. He was no longer the all-powerful titan. He was a man exposed, his dark deeds brought into the unforgiving light. He sputtered, "Security! Get them out! All of them!" But it was too late. The dam had broken. The fear was gone, replaced by a collective sigh of defiance. I picked up my personal mug, the one my kids had painted, and walked towards my desk, a small, defiant smile playing on my lips. My firing wasn't the end. It was the beginning of the end for Victor Thorne, and a new beginning for me. My firing, that moment of confrontation in front of the entire office, felt like jumping off a cliff, but landing on solid ground. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done, but also the most freeing. Thorne, of course, tried to dismiss it as a rogue employee having a meltdown. He probably thought he'd squashed the problem. But when Ben and Sarah followed my lead and courageously submitted formal complaints detailing the data manipulation, the verbal abuse, and the unethical practices, the story started to spread beyond the office walls. Prodigy Innovations was a big name, and the media, especially the kind that loves to expose corporate hypocrisy, caught wind of it. The narrative of an executive chasing an astronomical, potentially trillion-dollar compensation package while his employees were driven to illness, despair, and forced into unethical actions was just too juicy to ignore. Internal investigations were launched, fueled by the evidence Ben had meticulously kept and the testimonies of other brave colleagues who, inspired by our stand, finally found their voices. The optimized Project Chimera figures were exposed, revealing a house of cards built on deceit. Victor Thorne, the man who believed he was untouchable, was ultimately forced to resign. His grand compensation package, once practically secured, became a symbol of corporate excess and malfeasance, eventually stripped away as the company faced lawsuits and a massive public relations nightmare. His name, once whispered with reverence, became synonymous with toxic leadership. It wasn't a triumphant movie ending where he went to jail, but seeing his ambition crumble, watching his carefully constructed empire of lies collapse, was a deeply satisfying kind of justice. For me, the immediate aftermath of being fired was tough. It was a cold December, and suddenly I was jobless, just weeks before Christmas. But there was no regret. That burden, that suffocating weight of fear and complicity was gone. My wife, Sarah, was incredibly supportive. "You did the right thing, Mark," she'd said, holding my hand. "We'll figure it out. We always do." And we did. That experience, as painful as it was, taught me invaluable lessons. It taught me the true cost of silence, the importance of knowing your worth, and the undeniable power of standing up for what's right, not just for yourself, but for others. It reminded me that no job, no amount of money, is worth sacrificing your integrity, your health, or your family. We are not just cogs in a machine. We are people with lives and values that extend far beyond a quarterly report or a boss's inflated ego. And sometimes the biggest mistake a terrible boss can make is underestimating the human spirit, thinking they can break it without consequences. My firing wasn't the end of my career. It was the beginning of my freedom, and a stark reminder that even in the face of overwhelming power, one voice, when joined by others, can shatter the illusion of invincibility.